Doing pretty good. I didn't know if you were going to have a video, or I'm sorry, like a slideshow presentation for today, or if you wanted to do it more just like kind of a discussion and allow people to ask questions.
I figured I would do more of a discussion and let people ask questions, kind of like a Q&A, if they want to pick my brain about CMP and all that.
So let's start off then. Well, obviously, I'll do a quick introduction, and then from there, maybe you can just kind of give us a synopsis of that incredible reporting that you did recently. Like, I feel so lucky that you're here joining us now. It's just so timely because we got so much feedback from our members about that article. So I have a I have a feeling that people are going to be really engaged in this discussion. So if you'll just allow me for a quick second to go to my script and introduce you and to kind of lay the groundwork or the ground rules for this. And then we'll just go ahead and get started, okay? So give me a brief moment here.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at Secular AZ today. And for those of you who are joining, please feel free to put your name in the webinar chat, and please make sure that you change that little blue button on the bottom from saying hosts and panelists to saying everyone, so that way everybody can hear your words. Let's see. As you all know, white Christian nationalism is the greatest threat to our democracy, and Secular AZ is your voice for the separation of religion and government. We are a nonprofit, and we act as your voice to elected officials all across the state and at every level. So be sure to check out all of our social media channels and like, subscribe, and share. And also, if you are a secular activist woman or man in the Tucson area, we have an exciting new program that's happening down there. So if you like watching this speaker series live on Zoom, or as some people call them, Rage Fridays, maybe you would like to do it around other like-minded individuals. In Tucson, we are launching a weekly Tucson get-together starting June 7th, which is next week, from noon to 1 to watch the live speaker series presented every single Friday. So this is a casual open house format. You can come as you are, come early or drop in late, and no need to RSVP. It's located at a home converted to a community meeting place in the San Clemente neighborhood near Broadway and Alvernon. And Secular AZ members and their guests are all welcome. You can get the address by emailing Mary at secularaz.org. And thanks again, Mary, for organizing this great event. There will be soft drinks, coffee, and tea provided. Feel free to bring your own lunch or snacks. And we hope to see you at this weekly in-person Secular AZ Southern Arizona event starting next Friday. I'd also like to announce that we will be tabling at Bullhead City Pride on June 8th, and in Bisbee for the 20th anniversary of Bisbee Pride on June 14th through the 16th. So please stop by either of those booths, and I look forward to seeing you all. And very briefly, I just need to honor the memory of the best dog ever. In October of 2020, I found a filthy skin and bones black and white pit mix and named her Moxie. She gave birth to 11 puppies, and she was my ride or die companion through some pretty gnarly stuff over the last 4 years. She was the best, most beautiful, silliest, and loyalist best friend I've ever had, and my heart is in a million pieces over losing her. I love you so much, my Moxie girl. You were the very best girl ever. But for today, it's not Rage Friday now. Today it's Sadness Friday, I guess. But I'm very excited today because we have a stellar guest. We are today joined by local reporter Jerod MacDonald-Evoy, who will be discussing his reporting on the Council for National Policy, a secretive Christian policy group that pushes Christian nationalism and extremist right-wing ideology into mainstream politics in Arizona and around the country. Jerod reports for the Arizona Mirror. Previously, he worked at the Arizona Republic, where he spent 4 years covering everything from dark money and politics to Catholic priests' sexual abuse scandals. He brings strong watchdog sensibilities and creative storytelling skills to the Arizona Mirror. Many of you probably saw his recent article where he talked specifically about the CNP. So I'm so excited today to have Jerod MacDonald-Evoy. And please, Jerod, if you could give us a quick synopsis of that incredible comprehensive article that you just published recently. I know that most of the people here probably already read it, but if you could give them a quick summary of what your investigative journalism uncovered.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. And also, I'm very deeply sorry for your loss, and my heart goes out to you during this time. I've been there with pets as well. Um, On to CMP. So I have researched a bit about the Council for National Policy a bit before, and this story was kind of a deep dive into it. I had a researcher from another news organization called Documented reach out to me, and they had gotten their hands on some exclusive documents from CNP. CNP, Council for National Policy, is they were founded in 1981, and they're a fairly secretive Christian policy organization that works to kind of further advance Christian ideals and Christian nationalism into American politics. And what I found when researching them was that there are very deep ties with this group to Arizona. There's a number of notable Arizona politicians and activists who are a part of this organization, such as Jake Hoffman, Senator Jake Hoffman. He in the documents that were provided me is still actually listed as CEO of Rally Forge instead of his title in the Senate. And they also recently introduced Turning Point USA's Charlie Kirk and Tyler Boyer into the fold of their organization. There's also other notable Arizona Christian activist groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is founded out in Scottsdale. They have several members who are a part of the organization. And basically the point of CMP is to push these Christian nationalist ideas. It was founded by Tim LaHaye back in 1981. He's a kind of referred to as a doomsday pastor because his big thing that he got famous for and preaching a lot was about the end times, basically, and his beliefs in it. He wrote the Left Behind series about the rapture. It was a young adult novel series aimed at children to try to educate them on his particular beliefs about what would happen with the rapture. He's also very anti-LGBTQ plus. He's believes in a number of conspiracy theories, or believed in a number of conspiracy theories like the Illuminati controlling the world governments, and was very anti-Roman Catholic as well. So that kind of gives you a framework of what this group was. They became very involved, I found, in the efforts to overturn the election with one of its prominent members, Virginia Ginny Thomas, wife of Supreme Court Justice Thomas. She, as early as February 2020, I found through this reporting and research that she was pushing before the election of 2020 the voter fraud narrative, along with Cleta Mitchell, who became a Trump advisor, and a lot of others that we would see in that election fraud space. And there's a number of people who were involved in the planning of January 6th who were also involved in this organization. So it's kind of like, it sounds a little bit like one of those, red string board conspiracy things, but CMP is very much connected to pretty much every far-right Christian organization you could probably imagine, like the Heritage Foundation as well. So my story really looked into that and kind of laid bare what it is, what they're doing, and who's involved here in Arizona.
Yeah, it was really comprehensive, and for I think a lot of us, that kind of follow this stuff, it wasn't that surprising, but you still, uncovered some details that the vast majority of regular everyday like voters just don't even know about. And in your experience, do you see now more of an awareness of the presence of white Christian nationalists in in elected positions? Are you seeing like more of those regular everyday voters being like, oh, wait a second, this doesn't seem right? Is there a greater awareness?
I think that's a little tough to say because while I think there is some greater awareness, due in part largely to the internet and the way it's transformed our society to be able to research these things and make these connections, I think that your average voter is maybe not as in tuned to this, what I would say, kind of wonkiness of what is going on behind the scenes. I also think that the average voter might just be confused by it. When I speak to like what you'd say is the quote unquote average voter, they're usually not the person that is very involved in reading the news. They don't get involved in the politics as deeply as maybe the bigger stories. And honestly, they usually don't talk. They don't talk to us in the press. They don't respond to polls and things like that. It's more especially now we're seeing even larger and larger that divide between the partisan divide grow. it gets hard to kind of get a gauge on, well, what does the general public, so to speak, think about this? But there is a greater, I would say, awareness of what Christian nationalism is, how it's been kind of seeping its way into the larger body politic since I would say about the early 2000s with the Bush administration, and what that means for everyone else. And I think with the acceptance that we've seen in the past 10 years of, like the LGBTQ community, and seeing how Christian nationalism has impacted, the progress in those fronts, I think it has brought more of an awareness to what Christian nationalism is, but it's hard to tell what the average voter might actually think about that.
So one of the things that really just irks me at this point is the fact that we have, two fake electors who are sitting in positions of, they're both in the Senate, right? We've got Hoffman and we've got Kern. We've got Kern's mugshot, but we don't have Hoffman's yet. I, I'm just shocked. I don't even know how to come up with a question, but I'm shocked that we have two elected officials who still are chairing their committees. Are you seeing, and I don't know how much you cover this in other states, but we know that there are fake electors all over the United States. Is this common? Like, are other states that have elected officials who are also fake electors, are they still in these positions of power?
Well, that's a very good question. I actually spoke a bit about that yesterday with two officers who were at the Capitol on January 6th who were campaigning for Biden. I kind of asked them that question as well. I said, you were at J6, both of you, and we have two elected members of the Senate that were at the Capitol on January 6th, one of them being very close to some of the violence that occurred. And so I asked them about that, and basically their response was Arizona is a bit of an outlier, they feel like, and that there are other states that have taken some action. For example, in New Mexico, Coy Griffin, who was a member of Cowboys for Trump, was at the Capitol during the attack. He made some inflammatory comments that came back at him, and he was actually removed from his position as a county commissioner due to his participation in that riot. Other states don't have as many, I would say, people elected, but there's been a lot of people who've ran. Arizona is the outlier in the fact that we have a number of these people who were involved in the fake elector scheme, January 6th, the lawsuits that were like the Kraken lawsuit, who are major players in our state's government. And that does make Arizona very much an outlier, I would say, as compared to other states, especially when I've talked with fellow reporters within my own network in those other states. The same comment usually comes back as, man, what's in the water in Arizona?
Indeed. I mean, we've got Jacob Chansley, the QAnon shaman, Kelly Ward and her. I mean, the corruption is so deep and thick and connected. It's pretty astounding. And especially at a time where, I feel like these folks are really genuinely concerned about maintaining their control in both chambers of the House and the Senate and the legislature. So and speaking of desperation, they recently voted right to impeach, or the committee decided that impeaching Attorney General Mays is going to be their next step. Do you actually see that happening? Like, they're going to actually be discussing the impeachment of our Attorney General, who may quite possibly be the most popular statewide elected official that we have?
Well, that's a good question too. I think I forgot exactly who wrote the story in the Republic, but they got a hold of Ben Toma, and he had basically said that he didn't see a path forward for anything like this because, especially in the Senate, because the votes aren't there. You need a supermajority in order to pass an impeachment. So I think that there are members of the party, and this is something we've seen in the legislature the past year or two, is there's kind of this divide within kind of both the parties, but you see it a lot more with the Republican Party, where there is the Republican Party, and then there's like the more extreme version of the Republican Party with the Arizona Freedom Caucus. They're very much more interested in what I would say are kind of these political maneuvers to try to push an agenda, whether that's impeaching Mays, or going after certain executive powers, or like the director's nomination committee. That's all this kind of more vocal extreme arm of the party that we're seeing engaging in these tactics that might not even become fruitful. Like I said, they will not have the votes to impeach Mays. They simply don't, because they need the Democrats. And I do not imagine a world where any Democrat is going to be voting to impeach the newly elected Democratic Attorney General. And so I think we have this very interesting dynamic that we've been seeing growing in the past 2 years, the legislature, these kind of pocket caucuses.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question here in the chat, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer it. The question is, there are Christian nationalists hiding in plain sight in Fountain Hills. Are you connecting dots to these people? So do you focus on municipalities like that?
I do on occasion. I am more focused on the state capital, but I have heard a bit about the things going on out in Fountain Hills. And I want to believe this is maybe what they're referencing is the Alan Skillcorn, he's been a very loud person down here at the Capitol. He often speaks up on a number of bills. A number of the bills are Freedom Caucus bills that he supports. And a lot of them have crossovers with Christian nationalism. As far as the overall makeup of Fountain Hills, and if Skillcorn is a outlier or not, that I haven't done enough research into say definitively. But I have noticed that you have these people from other areas of the state, particularly Maricopa County, who are engaging in this kind of rhetoric as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been down to the Capitol many times in this legislative session, and I have seen council member Skillicorn there supporting the most extremist bills, of course, and seems to be pretty tight with both Senators Hoffman and Kern. He also, from what I understand, and perhaps somebody in the audience who is from Fountain Hills, I'm pretty sure he was censured or even maybe he can't even attend meetings without a chaperone because the vitriol and so please, if you're in the chat here and you're from Fountain Hills, I remember reading something where he's not even allowed to communicate with his colleagues because he's so his rhetoric is very violent and he makes a lot of threats and things like that. So somebody will pop in here, I just about guarantee it. Let's see, here's a question coming from New Mexico Skies. Can't the governor pass an executive order to get the fake electors out of government?
No, she cannot. The legislature basically is its own police. We have our three, branches of government, but the legislature is in charge of policing its own members. That's why you see a lot of these ethic committee things that have been going on around lately. One's particularly aimed at the Democrats, then the Democrats will aim ones at the Republicans. But in order to actually get someone removed from office, that has to go through the legislature. That needs a supermajority vote once again, and that's not something that would ever happen. They can be censured by their own party if their party feels like they need to do that. But once again, that I don't see the kind of momentum for anything like that happening. Right now, the party, at least in Maricopa, has been focused on censuring people who they deem rhinos or things like that that don't maybe follow along the Trump narrative or the voter fraud narrative. So the ability for accountability has to come from within the House.
And, this brings up, we had quite a few people reaching out to us a few months ago when Senator Anthony Kern had a whole full prayer circle on the floor of the Senate and was speaking in tongues and looked like sniffing the carpet. I don't even know what was happening. It was very strange. We had a ton of our members reach out and say, hey, what are you guys doing about this? Well, because like you said, they police themselves. We went ahead and filed a complaint with, Senate President Warren Peterson, but nothing happened, and as you brought up, I guess we saw an ethics committee hearing last year for Senator or Representative Stall Hamilton and the whole Bible Gate thing. We saw one for, oh gosh, what was her name? Was it Rachel Jones or the woman that got removed?
Liz Harris.
Yeah, Liz Harris, Lisa's son. So it does happen, but it has to be something like really, well, basically whoever the chair of that committee is gets to decide. So it's not necessarily a fair or diplomatic process in any way. It ends up usually being a witch hunt. I mean, there was an ethics committee, I think, hearing recently about the two members of the House, Annalise Ortiz and the other gentleman who,
Oscar de los
kind of,
Santos.
thank you, Oscar de los Santos, who kind of interrupted Matt Gress's press conference. So there are instances of that, but because they police themselves and because it does take a 2/3 majority, it doesn't, very little will happen when these breaches happen. Jude Simons is here and she's pointing out that JD Mesnard is with Alliance Defending Freedom. So there's that.
Correct.
David has a comment here that says, it seems that almost always any and all national incidents and egregious individuals have some kind of tie back to Arizona. That is unfortunate, yes. Okay, so to answer the question about Alan Skillicorn, he was censured, and now he's suing the town for violating his First Amendment rights. Alan sounds delightful, doesn't he, everyone? Yes, the shame on the floor of the house. Now, Phil's here to add another comment. He says, here's a crazy thought. Has anyone attempted to infiltrate the CNP? Has anybody attempted to do that, Jerod?
I believe some people have. That's how we've gotten some of the documents that we've gotten over the years. There was a piece, I think, back in 2016. I want it. I may be wrong on this. I want to say it was the Rolling Stone, but they had someone who was able to get into the conference. When the conference was out here, actually last year at the Fairmont, I tried desperately to find a way to get in, or find someone who was going in. But since it was at this very large luxury resort, it was very hard to do that, and not be noticed or anything like that. They have been investigated by like the IRS for their nonpartisan nature of their nonprofit arm. And that's partially, I believe, why they broke off and created the 501(c)(4), which allows them to do more of that political type of posturing. But as far as I know, no one has really infiltrated like in the way like an Amanda Moore might have, but there's always that possibility. I mean, someone's leaking this stuff out to us.
And that's yeah, there's a trans woman who I've seen before. She recently infiltrated CPAC and did a full two-parter on YouTube about her experience going to CPAC. It was really fascinating. And like whenever I hear about some of these events at Dream City Church or in other places, I would love to just go and be a fly on the wall, but I think I'm probably a tad recognizable. And so if anybody here is ever interested in going to any of these like far right wing events and you want to tell us what's gone on, I would love that. And I love too what you said, Jerod, about that the IRS does sometimes answer complaints, and that's a whole other thing. If you're out there and maybe you're retired and you can sit on the phone on hold all day long, I've spoken with former IRS agents who have said, we are so overwhelmed, but if you're persistent and you want to continue to file complaints against, say, like a Dream City church or some other church that's constantly politicking, and you get the right IRS agent, someone there might be willing to help you, but it's a matter of them being overwhelmed and not enough people calling in. So if you want some volunteer opportunities, we're here to help. Let's see. Yeah, I think we answered all these questions. Maybe I've been watching too many movies. Let's see. Would be nice if the FBI infiltrated the CNP and identified them as a terrorist group. There's a lot of organizations right now that appear, for me as an outsider, as terrorist groups. Are you seeing like a rise in these kinds of organizations that are just kind of like, in my opinion, right there out in the open, blatantly, promoting these Christian nationalist ideologies? Are you seeing a rise in those kinds of organizations, those kinds of groups?
Well, first, I just like to real quickly say that the FBI investigating and doing a deep cover thing like that would probably likely be seen as a First Amendment violation. They not that they haven't done operations like that before, but those have also faced criticism. Famously, when the FBI infiltrated the Church of Scientology and found out that the Church of Scientology had already infiltrated them, basically. But I have been seeing a rather a rise in Christian nationalism. I mean, one example of that is right now you're hearing all the debate about the Appeal to Heaven flag at Alito's residence. That's leading a lot of conservative influencers to start pushing that flag as well. Whereas that was something that really only the really far right to the Christian nationalist perspective was doing. For example, we have Senator Janae Shamp out here. She has one on her desk. And this was a flag that was flown very widely at January 6th. Also, my first introduction to that flag was a neo-Nazi fight club that used that flag quite often. They were actually photographed with that flag at the Capitol on J6. And so seeing that kind of become more of a mainstream thing has been an interesting kind of mainstreaming of Christian nationalism, and it's kind of part of a larger phenomenon, I think, that we're seeing of mainstreaming of fringe beliefs. We see QAnon has creeped now its way into mainstream beliefs. We see anti-Semitism in the form of, the Soros conspiracies or other types of anti-Semitism seeping into the mainstream belief. It's this kind of conspiratorial thinking and also this kind of extreme thinking has become a lot more popular, I would say, in the last 8 years. Really, in the last 4, it's really flourished, especially since January 6th, at least from my perspective as an observer.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see, let me get into this. The questions that we have here. David says, Faithful America, a religious progressive group fighting white Christian nationalism, is beginning to focus on Arizona. I spoke with their new digital community organizer yesterday. Contact me if you want to join an upcoming meeting. Oh, thanks so much for that, David. That sounds really interesting. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be saving that email address. Lindsay, thank you for finding the article that Jerod was referencing. Okay, Farrell has another question to you, Jerod. Are you connecting dots in Arizona's network to the new Apostolic Reformation?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, the group that was on the floor of the Capitol, I'm very certain is connected to that. Kern, Carrie Lake, some others have retweeted some people that are very big in that movement. It's a very interesting movement. I mean, you have people that are a part of that who believe that they could pray to bring a baby back to life that had passed away. They're involved in, some of them were involved in J6. You have people like Mike Flynn, who I believe is a part of that movement as well. And that all also ties into another thing called Christian dominionism, in which there's this belief that Christians need to take control of the 7 dominions. And that includes, I believe, like government, education, media, a bunch of other realms, basically, in order for them to control and bring about, this Christian nation and this Christian kind of utopia, I guess I would put it as. There's a lot of connections to that particular group out here, especially with members of the Freedom Caucus.
Let's see, there's a comment here. Kate says, if they are threatening our democracy, they are a terrorist group. GOP equals groupies of Putin. And I want to reference something that you said before, Jerod, is that they are emboldened now. They are embracing these things. It was when I first came into this organization that it was a representative in the House of Representatives who brought up that there was an appeal to heaven flag on the second floor of the House. Nobody knew how it got there. Nobody knew who took it down. We complained about it. And the only reason she even knew about it was because she happens to have a neighbor who flies it and was like, hey, what's that flag? And then she looked it up and was like, oh, wow, this is terrible. But had she not been familiar with that back in 2022 when she contacted us, we never would have known. I think it was Senator Kavanaugh this year who actually authored a bill that would specifically carve out that HOAs can, that people in HOAs can fly that flag in particular. And so, yeah, it's like kind of flagrant at this point. We've got people like Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, like proudly saying, yeah, I'm a Christian nationalist. I'm a Christian and I love our nation. Like, they're confusing that term. And I think real Christians are really starting to pay attention to that. And they're not necessarily happy with it because one of our fastest growing groups of people for secular AZ are those who identify as being religious or faithful. And it's because they're sick and tired of these Christian nationalists speaking for them and their faith. Let's see. Somebody else pointed out, Mary, thank you for pointing out, great organization. Amanda Taylor, the Christians Against Christian Nationalism.org is a great organization if you want to get involved. Yes, Speaker Mike Johnson does have that flag outside of his office door. Oh, okay. Hopefully, Farrell, your question's getting answered. They want to know how to download a copy of the chat. Ian says that his neighbor back in Arizona flew that flag above the American flag. Ay, ay, ay. Wow. Um, yeah, they're confused about a lot of terms. And yes, it was hung. Yep. Okay. I will take a look and see if I can find. Annika's asking who the trans woman was that infiltrated CPAC. I will take a look and see if I can find that video because it was really interesting to see them walking around in this space and talking about it. The most interesting part might have been when they realized that their grinder was still on and open to other users, and there were about 32 people who were attending CPAC who asked this trans woman who is presenting as a cis male for, a good time in Washington, D.C. So that's always interesting how they, every accusation is a confession. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how Christian nationalism really is right in our own backyard. Have you been tracking the explosion, I guess, that's happened? Like the fact that we do have these major organizations here in Arizona, like Turning Point USA, like Alliance Defending Freedom. Why have they chosen to make Arizona their home turf?
Yeah, well, first, real quick, the woman who infiltrates CPAC, I believe her YouTube is called Dead Domain. Um, I've seen that two-part series. It's very interesting.
Mhm.
Um, when it comes to Arizona, that's a question that I've asked a lot. I've tried to understand why we have as much as we have out here, and I think it probably comes back to just historically some of the different types of politics and people that have intersected with this state. The state's usually been a very conservative state. We had a large population of Mormons who settled here. We had a large population of Christians who settled here. And when you also think about the makeup of this state, it's akin to Florida, where we have a larger population of people who are of 55 and up, that retirement age. And people in that age range tend to I don't mean to stereotype a whole generation, but they tend to lean a little bit more to the right. And so you see a lot more of these things being more acceptable in our state. And because those people get into positions of power, power ends up, trickling downwards, going to other municipalities. And I think Arizona is also kind of positioned itself to be a boom for Christian nationalism in particular, um, because we're a conservative state, but we are also a bit of a libertarian state. And a lot of Christian nationalism kind of has a toe in that world as well. So it's a very comfortable mixture of different things for people who have those beliefs to kind of set up shop. I mean, you look at particularly like Yavapai County as well. It's the reddest county in the state. And you look at the demographics of that area, and it starts to make a little bit more sense. But we're definitely seeing a shift away from that. And I think that's also why they're fighting so hard here, because as we saw in 2020, the state did go more purple. It's probably anticipated to go purple again this year from some of the polling I'm seeing, although it's hard to trust polling. And then obviously in 2022, we saw, statewide races that went Democratic that usually haven't in the past. And so I think that they're putting a lot of that power into this state in particular because it's a swing state, used to be one of their strongholds, and they're trying to use it as a way to understand how to, I guess, combat the movement of time. It seems that if you look at the course of history, things move further from one direction to another, in particular in metropolitan areas. And so I think that they're using Arizona kind of as a test bed to see how to combat that for them.
So yeah, you brought up more rural spaces like Yavapai County. Um, Ravon Bowens is on here, and Ravon has been a huge advocate in the Sholo area, a very rural space for secularism and separation of church and state. She's got a small but mighty group of, secularists there who are trying to get something going. So she's asking if you have any suggestions on how to talk about secularism to white Christian nationalists. I'm not optimistic, but I'd love for you to answer that question.
I think that's a really difficult question. I think that's an important one, though, to ask. because I think just as a society, we need to learn how to be better at talking and listening to each other and sharing our ideas and our differences. I think that's honestly one of the things that makes this country so great to me is the fact that I mean, we can have people who are Christian nationalists, and we can have people who are secular, and they can exist in the same space without, abhorrent violence that you see in some countries where ethnic cleansing happens, where, one religious group or non-religious group are in the same area. The United States is very good at having, for the most part, these kind of conversations. But I think that when it comes to taking a secular position and bringing it to someone who is of that belief, you're going to have a difficult time because it's something that's very ingrained in the culture of a lot of Christian nationalists. And a lot of them, especially nowadays, are becoming more radicalized in the beliefs of, it's our way or the highway. This was a Christian nation from the beginning. So I think that that's a question that would be really well answered by someone who is like done de-radicalization. I've done a lot of research into de-radicalization and conflict resolution type people. And I think what it really comes down to is trying to talk to them on their level, on the issues, and trying to point out how maybe your two paths intersect and things that you agree on. Like, for example, I've seen, secular people and Christians both agree that, look, we need to have freedom of religion in order to not be prosecuted. That's a middle ground. It's not a middle ground in why you might believe that or see that. And I think that when it comes to having those discussions, it's about trying to find a middle ground and going from there. And I know that's kind of I feel like a milk toast answer, but that's kind of how I would see it as someone who's engaged with a lot of these people in interviews or out in the field.
Mm-hmm. And New Mexico Skies points out secularists are demonized from the pulpit, so understanding will be difficult. That's so true, because wherever I go, or like, if I get wind of, somebody like whoever it is, Libs of TikTok, Arizona Women of Action, whatever the horrible website or username is, they come at me and they will say, that I'm a Satan worshiper, that I'm, possessed by demons. Like, they literally, like, these folks are folks who really believe in the presence of demons and Satan and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I agree with you, New Mexico Skies, that it's very difficult to even get to a place where you can speak to those people, because they literally think that you are like a lizard person that eats the adrenochrome and kills babies and stuff. It's bizarre, but that's where they're coming from. I'm so going back real quick to these municipalities. Have you looked in do you have you been paying attention at all to what's going on in the city of Peoria with the mayor there, Jason Beck?
I've been paying a little bit of attention there, about what's going on. I do keep an eye on the municipalities. I've done some research and writing into the intersections of Christian nationalism in that space. I did a deep dive a few years ago about how the far right was using school boards as basically a rallying point, and kind of talked about the history of what happened with the Vale School District, and the involvement of the Patriot Party there, and what all that meant to kind of public discourse at school boards, and how that was harming the school boards in that sense. And now we have someone who was actually a part of that storming of Vale, is an elected official, Senator Justine Wadsack. But in Peoria in particular, there's been a lot of, I think, real interesting things going on there. You've had people from the MAGA movement kind of, I think, really come at that school district really hard in a lot of ways. You have people like Kern who've been targeting it. I believe one of the other people that's been kind of a loud uh, proponent of I would say Christian nationalist ideals is Heather Rook, who's been out there, and others. I have been keeping an eye on it because I see Peoria, what's going on there, probably as it's kind of a microcosm of the larger thing going on as a whole. And kind of, like I said, it shows that power dynamic of it starts at the top and it will trickle down usually to other areas of government. And we're seeing that actively in the school boards. And we haven't started seeing it totally yet in city councils. We're starting to see that. But school boards have been the real big battleground for Christian nationalists over the past like 2 years.
Which is why we started paying a little bit more attention there. Thankfully, Governor Katie Hobbs allowed us to, kind of step off with our laser focus on the legislature. And so now we're able to do that. But in my, my background is also in education, and I sat on my local school board for 8 years. Aside from maybe our state, representatives or senators coming and doing a tour, or maybe giving us a legislative update about what's going on at the legislature, I've never seen a municipality get involved with what's happening at the school board level the way that Jason Beck in Peoria is getting involved at the school board level, to the point where he's, fully funding, like maxing out on these MAGA extremist members. And he's already worked on chasing out one of the city councilors there who's openly LGBTQ, or an ally of the LGBTQ community. And so it's really telling. Ian says, I'm all for talking to each other when that is possible. And also, I hope the dildo of consequences finds the people trying to do this to Arizona, and that it is not lubricated. He's always got a way with words, Ian. Let's see. Annika says, I grew up very evangelical. I think showing people the early roots of their Christian nationalism in the Baptist literature that hated Jews, Catholics, Mormons, etc. I wonder and have the hunch that showing them their roots and picking at the pan-Christian nationalism that focuses on who's wrong could work. Destabilize them and move their focus back to which type of Christianity is right. Let them fight each other again. Okay, that's interesting. Like, I don't have that background of an evangelical upbringing. Praise the Lord. But I know a lot of people who do, and I think that their take on all this is really interesting. And I specifically enjoy, reading about people like R.L. Stoller, who's big about the, de-radicalization and helping people who are homeschooled and really indoctrinated in that K-12 homeschool setting, and then, managed to start unraveling their faith. I'm fascinated by that. And I do believe, Annika, that it would take other, like, recovering Christians to help these folks who have been raised in that kind of radical Christianity. Yes, it is hard to talk to people who think you're demonic. I'm not going to read that one, Ian, no matter how much you try to get me to read it. Let's see. Annika says, I'm not a secularist. I just want to know which, and this is in quotations, I just want to know which Christianity is right before I convert. I feel like those Christians over there are using their agenda to weaken your form of Christianity, but I think your version of Christianity might be right. Why should these Christian nationalists be the only ones to employ political divide and conquer tactics? Fair. Okay, yeah. And then, yeah, the hypocrisy of talking about how Christ-like they are when they couldn't be further from, like, what we believe Jesus was supposed to be like. So yeah, there's a lot of agreement there about how to talk to these people. And unfortunately, there's probably not a great way to talk to these people. So let's talk a little bit more about, is there any other area aside from, say, our legislature and how intensely our legislature, at least the most extreme members of our legislature, are intertwined in these extremist movements? Are there other pockets in Arizona that are causing you concern?
I think one of the things that I'm currently most concerned about is kind of the infiltration of the grassroots movements by Christian nationalists, neo-Nazis, anti-Semites. That's something that we're seeing actively happen that is pretty concerning. You have groups from, followers of Nick Fuentes to these guys who push, traditional, they're called trad cath, this traditional Catholic values, and they're part of like that trad wife movement. And they're also directly usually correlated with the neo-Nazi movement. I think seeing these particular actors go from seeing politics as kind of almost having an anarchist kind of perspective of, politics is never going to be our space, to we need to infiltrate politics. Politics is now our space. We have, quote, our guys in certain places. I think that infiltration of our political system by these really, really far right Christians, and sometimes non-Christians, actually, because there are some neo-Nazis that are atheists because they believe that, nothing matters but the white man. But I think that these infiltrations of political spaces by these type of extremists who normally would have been very much shunned right away. And when they're pointed out to maybe party members, it's, oh, well, so what, he said some things online, or so what, he has some controversial views. Stuff that used to just be instant, firing, or just instant way of being pushed out of a group, is now becoming more acceptable because, there's this idea of we have to own the libs, or we have to own, whoever it is, or anti-woke, or we're anti-cancel culture. I think that I wrote a story a few years ago about how the Groyper movement was looking to infiltrate Arizona politics. And honestly, sometimes I feel like that story fell on deaf ears, because we've had multiple Groypers now in high positions of power within Arizona politics, such as, Congressman Gosar having multiple members of his staff being associated with that, and white supremacist movements, or going to rallies and seeing these people, welcomed with open arms at these events. I think that for me, that is the most concerning thing going forward, because these are the people that, when you find their private chats, are talking very violent rhetoric that is very problematic. And these are also some of the same people that before January 6th were really pushing for something to happen there. And I think that sets us up for a very dangerous election, and for a very dangerous next few years, if we keep allowing these fringe elements to be accepted into the mainstream.
Yeah, that's the part that drives me crazy, is like the both sidesing of it all, and like, allowing these extremist groups some type of like, validity. They're extremists. And real quick, could you just very quickly define Groyper for those folks who maybe don't understand what that term means?
Yeah, so Groypers, they are followers of Nick Fuentes. Groyper comes from this cartoon frog image that they have, that is an evolution of the Pepe the Frog meme, and it's spelled Groyper. And they are all large followers of Nick Fuentes. They are anti-Semitic. They're usually tradcaf type people, and their whole concept from the beginning was, we want to push conservative beliefs further to the right. And they did that initially by going to like Turning Point USA conferences and trolling and making very anti-Semitic remarks and questions to speakers, or bullying and harassing all these other members of the conservative movement. And now when you look at Turning Point USA, who initially was like, we will never allow Nick Fuentes, we will never allow his followers into our fold, they've hired multiple Groypers, and they've hired multiple people who are associated with Fuentes. And and his people have even said that they won in that sense, because now Kirk is literally echoing a lot of the rhetoric that he was denouncing years ago, that was Fuentes's rhetoric. And so they've achieved their goal of what they say of pushing the Overton window, this concept of acceptable mainstream belief is what is within that window. And they're pushing it further and further to the right, into their ideas and their ideologies, which are largely anti-Semitic and white supremacist in nature.
Yeah, completely. And if you don't know who Nick Fuentes is, a quick Google search will help you out. I just started listening to the podcast Behind the Bastards. I think it's Rob Evans. Is that his name? I can't remember. Fantastic. And they do a 4-part series about Andrew Tate that I highly recommend. And I just looked to see if maybe they have Nick Fuentes. They don't, but I do see that there is a podcast out there called Curious Case of Nazi Cat Boys, on a podcast called It Could Happen Here. So I plan on listening to that next, because if you don't know who Nick Fuentes is, you probably should. He is a monster, as is all of these other Groypers, right? And yes, Wendy Rogers does support the Groyper movement and will post their memes. I mean, I'm pretty sure she's friends with Nick Fuentes. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Oh, Annika is saying they're going to send us some of the children's Christian extremists literature we had as evangelical kids. I've seen some of that before from some of our former guests, and it's always surprising to me, like the things that pass as curriculum in religious schools. It's bananas. So Jerod, what do you think though about this coming election? I'll tell you what, I've never been more stressed out about an election, and I've been on the ballot a couple of times, and I've still never been this stressed out. If things, what do you think? I mean, are some of these folks gonna, you know, our legal director here says that we are already in a slow civil war, as do other prominent atheists, agnostics, and humanists. Um, do you think that we're gonna break out into violence after this election?
It's hard to tell and it's scary. I will be the first to admit that I am also a little nervous and scared going into November, especially as a proud member of the, enemy of the people, as they like to call me. It's I am very certain that come November and probably as early as October, we will start seeing incidents of, armed people at polls, clashes at polling stations, and things of that nature. And I think that, to be quite frank, no matter which way this election goes, there's going to be some sort of chaos that ensues after. Whether that becomes another January 6th type event, that's still yet to be seen. I'd like to think that maybe our intelligence communities and our law enforcement communities have learned from that and are taking those lessons into this cycle. But I mean, I think about the midterms that just happened, and the issues we had there with people showing up at polling places with guns or videotaping people dropping off ballots, and that creating intimidation in and of itself. I think we're going to still see a lot more of that. I worry about, I remember Mike Lindell was talking about flying drones with equipment on them near polling stations. I think we're going to see all sorts of craziness happen this year. Whether, like I said, if that breaks out into mass violence, I'm not sure. I think there's very much a potential for it. We're kind of in a powder keg moment in our history, I would say. It's very tense. You can feel it with everyone. But the one thing I have confidence in is that our election officials are going to be able to conduct this appropriately, and securely. I've gotten tours of these facilities. I've spoken at length to them, and they're really preparing for this. And I think that they're having these same types of thoughts and conversations, and that gives me some peace of mind knowing that as well, because seeing the work that they're putting in, the extra work they're putting in, really makes me, I would say, proud to be an American, proud to be an Arizonan too, seeing what we're doing specifically here in this state, which is in a lot of ways very groundbreaking. Some of the different things that the county recorders and the Secretary of State are doing to ensure that these things don't happen, and they have contingency plans in place for that. But it's always, I believe it was Colin Powell who said it's the unknown unknowns that we should be fearful of. And that's, what I keeps me up at night as well.
Yeah, you just said too, that you're referred to as the enemy of the people. We see it at like every MAGA rally, whether it's Trump or it's Kern or Hoffman or whoever, all on down the line, they portray journalists as the enemy of the state, basically, the enemy of the people. Have you experienced some of those, death threats or threats of violence in your work?
Yeah, I've had quite a few. We've had a few death threats at the Mirror, some aimed at me, some aimed at my colleagues. One in particular I remember was a guy talking on 4chan about how he was going to lynch me and my colleagues. I also, on January 6th down here at the Arizona Capitol, people, because of the violence that happened at the DC Capitol, we kind of forget about what happened here locally, where there was a guillotine, lots of armed militia. They even broke some windows. And I remember I had to leave the event early because I had a family member in the hospital. But before I had found that out, I had a militiaman and his people come up to me, asking me a bunch of questions about who I was. I was cordial with them, and he was asking me questions about my camera. And then he tells me, the guys over there think you're Antifa. And I just kind of laughed at that. And he said, I don't think you are, but they do. And I said, well, and I said to him, well, I'm not Antifa. And then one guy in a skull siege mask says, well, uh, that's exactly what Antifa would say. And then after that, I was followed consistently by these individuals, and I had to take some weird routes to ensure they didn't follow me back to my car. And they were even following me while I'm trying to have this very personal phone call about a family member who was in the hospital with COVID at the time. And so that was my first like real in-person interaction. And it only got worse after that. I had people come up to me who I had no idea who they were, who would say my full name to me and say, "How you doing?" as a form of intimidation. I've had people follow my car. I've had people take photos of my car. I'm not an outlier. I know many other members of the local press who have gone through much worse, and have had to start carrying, or not, they felt better carrying, a firearm or something with them. It's a very scary environment for my job. And I am very nervous, honestly, going into November, when a lot of the rhetoric that comes at me, as of late, is your time is coming. It will be up in January of next year, because there's the belief that all, the members of the deep state will be prosecuted. And of course, I'm a member of that.
Well, I mean, and you look at Project 2025, and we should all be a little bit nervous. Um, it wasn't, it was a very thinly veiled death threat sent to our PO box about me, basically saying, we Christians know how to handle the likes of you. And if 2025 goes into effect in January, to reference The Handmaid's Tale, you and I will probably be the first people on the wall. You know what I mean? We're not going to be recruited to be one of the eyes or to be a Martha or anything else. It's scary, yeah, for sure. And especially when you're doing this kind of work and these kind of spaces with these kinds of extremists, they do not share our reality. They do not share our reality. They believe that I am possessed by Satan and that I kill babies to drink their adrenochrome, right? Like they think that you are a propaganda machine that's there only to serve like Biden or something. It's so very bizarre. There are a few comments here real quick. Annika wants to know what your social medias are so that everybody can follow you. So I don't know if you or Lindsay can maybe drop that in the chat. Kate, thank you so much. Kate is volunteering for the first time ever as a poll worker slash observer. We just had Jen Marzin on here last week to talk about, what it's like at the polling places. So thank you so much, Kate, for doing that. And everybody says, we hope you have a peaceful session, Kate. Howard says, one frustrating tactic of the extreme right is to co-opt previously innocuous symbols, like the OK hand sign, which looks like white power. Yes, for sure. Or colonial era flags and the upside down American flag, which traditionally has been a distress signal. If we concede these symbols are now extremist dog whistles, are we playing into their hands? But if we ignore them, are we letting them win by mainstreaming common images into right-wing signals? All lives matter and it's okay to be white are other examples of statements that aren't facially correct or facially incorrect, but contextualized into extreme right ideological coding. How do we best deal with these tactics? That's a good question. I mean, like, do we um concede that now this now means white power, or do we ignore it? I guess that's the gist of the question.
That's a really good question, because that's something that we as journalists have even had discussions about, especially with the OK thing. Because when I think that some of you might remember that when that kind of became a thing, a lot of conservatives kind of mocked it and were like, started doing the OK symbol whenever. I think that what's important, and this is something I've learned from talking with other extremist researchers and things like that, is context. Like, yes, they may have co-opted this symbol or these other things. That doesn't mean you should stop using them. What it means is you should try to look for the proper context, or consider the context in which you're using it. But that is something that is a big deal, because a lot of these groups are constantly changing their vernacular or their body language, things that they're doing in particular, in order to evade people and maybe try to mainstream things, or just to evade like what they believe are the censors. I mean, a good example of kind of how I feel about this is the Pepe the Frog meme. That started off as just a general, meme. It was from a comic. There's a really good documentary about this whole issue. Actually, I wish I remember the name of it right now. Oh, It's All Good, Man, I think is what it's called. and it follows the creator as he kind of deals with these questions. And because the creator of the Pepe famously killed off the character as well when it started gaining all this notoriety. But there's a lot of researchers I talked to, they're like, you know what, I use Pepe because I'm not going to let them, co-opt and steal something that I had an affinity for. But I keep an eye out for how it's used in context. So like not everyone who uses a Pepe the Frog, maybe avatar, is a white supremacist, but if they're spouting, talking points of those people, then well, now you know. So it's that I think the big thing is just understanding the context in which these symbols are used and how they're being used, and the context of how you use them. That would be kind of my take on it.
Well, and there's a recommendation here in the chat to go ahead and fly the Appeal to Heaven flag, but also fly the rainbow flag just to throw people off. So I kind of like that strategy. And now I'm very serious. Like I have a rainbow flag. It's actually the Philadelphia rainbow flag that has like all the inclusion, and then I have a Satanic Temple flag. Maybe I'll fly that along with an Appeal to Heaven flag and just confuse the hell out of my neighbors. um, well, I'm already over time, and I want to I want to honor your time, Jerod. So the way I usually try to end these discussions on Friday is because these are hopeless times a bit, the fact that you and I have been targeted in our personal lives for the work that we do in our professional lives is weird and not normal and not okay. So in these unusual times, what gives you hope, Jerod?
I think what gives me hope is just, I focus a lot on the extremes, right? I focus a lot on researching, following all these really awful things. But I remind myself that that is not the norm. They are called extremes for a reason because they are the extremes, they are the fringe, and they speak the loudest. Like the way I try to think about it is like, look at a Yelp company's Yelp reviews. Do you go to give a Yelp review if you had a good experience? Usually, no, it's a bad experience. So the vast majority of a place might have great experiences, and the vast majority of people aren't going to go out and complain or make all these problems. Those are the normal people, and I believe full-heartedly that they outnumber these extremes. It's just being aware of them, how to counteract it, and making sure that they don't get themselves into positions that can cause greater harm to a lot of people. But for me, the hope lies in the fact that, the majority of people just want to live their life, be happy, and, spend the weekend with their family or friends or their pets. And that gives me hope. And I had to remind myself of that every day when I'm diving into these things.
Yeah, my hope is also that people are I sense it because I go to these, or I don't really go anymore, but I watch a lot of these school board meetings, and I see a rage fatigue happening, like I think that these folks who were told that, there were litter boxes in the schools or whatever are starting to realize that that was all a bunch of bullshit, and so they're not going to these board meetings anymore because yeah, we got more important things to focus on, putting food on the table, getting our kids off to school and practices, and, like loving our pets or whatever it is. Like, this is not the focus, nor should it be. So I just want to say thank you so much, Jerod. The kudos that are happening here in our chat today are incredible. Like, everybody here supports the work that you do. And if you don't, by the way, you sure should be at least following Jerod on X, on Facebook, every other platform that he's on, and subscribe to the Arizona Mirror, because that was some of the best investigative journalism that I've seen in a long time. And I appreciate it, Jerod. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you. That means a lot. And I really appreciate it. And I'm only on really on X and Blue Sky, just FYI. I try to keep my social media usage to a minimum these days. So, but feel free to catch me in those two places. And thank you again for everyone's kind words, your kind words, and for having me to talk today.
Of course. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care. Bye.